Okay, let's dive into a deep dive. We're taking a close look at a case that, well, it really shattered the peace of a quiet community and has exposed some incredibly difficult realities about domestic violence.
Yeah, it really has.
The material you've put together for us here tells a story of a life tragically cut short, um, a desperate search for a fugitive, and it raises some really pointed questions about how we understand and respond to risk.
That's right. What's particularly striking as we go through these sources is how they don't just recount a crime, but they really try to trace the complex history and the escalating factors that tragically culminated in this event.
Right.
It's an in-depth examination, really, of the circumstances surrounding the death of Breanne Pennington.
Exactly. The sources bring us to Gardner, Massachusetts on Sunday, October 22nd, 2023. Gardner's described in the material as this quiet, kind of tranquil place, remarkably. Its first homicide in 3 years.
Wow, 3 years.
Yeah. And that day, everything changed for this community and especially for one family. Our goal today, exploring the sources you provided, is to pull out those crucial details, understand the context, and sort of walk through the layers of this unresolved case so you can grasp the full picture quickly and thoroughly.
Hmm.
Think of this as a shared journey through this material.
And it is a shared journey. We'll explore how this tragedy came to light, who Breanne was, the complex picture painted of her husband, the massive search that ensued, and importantly, what this case highlights about the dynamics and dangers of domestic violence.
So let's start right there with that terrible morning.
Okay. Sunday, October 22, 2023, just after 9 a.m., the discovery of the crime wasn't made by authorities arriving on a call, which is, often how these things unfold.
Right.
Instead, the sources tell us it was Breanne and Aaron Pennington's 4 young children who, tragically, were the ones who initiated the sequence of events that revealed what had happened.
That image. 4 young kids, aged between 2 and 9 in that situation.
Right.
It's almost unbearable to consider.
It really is.
What led them to seek help?
They went to a neighbor because they couldn't find their father, Aaron, and they reported that their mother was crying in her bedroom.
Crying.
Yeah, it was the simple act by the children seeking help for their mother that led to the terrible discovery. The neighbor they approached was Robert Corbett, identified in the sources as a church leader with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where the Pennington family was involved.
Okay. And the material indicates Corbett responded immediately and went into the home at 42 Cherry Street. What did he find when he entered?
Well, when he entered the house, Corbett found Breanne's body. The sources include some harrowing details from his 911 call.
Oh, wow.
He described a bloody scene to dispatchers. His words, they really paint a vivid and chilling picture. There's a woman in the bed. She's hurt. I'm not sure exactly how hurt, but there's blood.
Just awful.
Yeah. This was the initial devastating report from inside the home.
First responders arrived on the scene very quickly after that 911 call, just after 9 a.m., right?
That's right. Upon their arrival, police found Breanne Pennington, 30 years old, deceased in a second-floor bedroom. She had suffered a fatal gunshot wound.
And the scene itself, how did law enforcement describe it initially?
It was immediately assessed by Lieutenant Robert Parr of the Massachusetts State Police, and his initial characterization was stark and, well, telling. He described it as a violent scene and significantly stated that it appeared to be an execution.
An execution. That's a powerful word right from the start.
It is. That choice of words, execution, right from the outset,
Yeah.
signaled that investigators believe this was a deliberate and calculated act, not, a crime of sudden passion.
And based on the circumstances in the scene, who was quickly identified as a primary suspect?
Her husband, Aaron Pennington, 33 years old at the time, was swiftly identified as the main suspect. This led almost immediately to authorities issuing a murder warrant for his arrest.
Right.
From that point on, he became the subject of an extensive and ongoing search that, as we'll discuss, continues to this day.
Okay. Stepping back from that day, who was Breanne Pennington, the sources paint a picture of someone deeply loved.
They really do. Breanne, who is affectionately called Breezy by those close to her, was 30 years old. Friends and family described her with such warmth. Consistently, the words used were welcoming and loving.
That's lovely.
One description that really resonates from the material is that she always saw the best in everything and people. Another moving description is that her presence definitely lit up the room.
Wow.
She sounds like she had a wonderfully positive spirit, which makes the manner of her death all the more devastating.
Absolutely. Where did she come from and how did her life intersect with Aaron's?
Breanne grew up on the West Coast. She met Aaron in Arizona, and that's where they began their life together and started their family.
And she followed him through his career in the military, correct?
Yes, that's an important part of their history detailed in the sources. She supported him and followed him throughout his time in the U.S. Air Force. This included a period stationed overseas in Okinawa, Japan.
Okinawa, right.
Interestingly, one of the sources includes a perspective from her aunt, Brenda Hull, who believes that significant marital problems specifically began or worsened around 2014 during their time stationed there.
2014. So this wasn't a relationship that suddenly became troubled just before the tragedy. The material suggests long-standing issues.
Absolutely. The court documents mentioned in the sources are quite clear on this point. They indicate that their marital issues had been ongoing for quite some
For
time.
quite some time.
Yeah. This suggests a persistent underlying instability within the relationship, predating their move to Gardner.
And after Aaron's time in the military ended, they relocated to Gardner.
That's right. The sources state that after Aaron's discharge from the Air Force in 2021, they made the move to Gardner, Massachusetts. He took a new job with a defense contractor in the area, and they also became involved with a new church community there.
A fresh start, supposedly.
Supposedly. But despite this new chapter and new surroundings, it seems their domestic struggles, which had reportedly started years earlier, continued and, unfortunately, escalated.
A significant factor highlighted in the sources regarding Aaron is his struggles with mental health.
Yes, this is presented as a critical element in understanding the context leading up to the crime. According to the sources, Aaron struggled significantly with his mental health. He had a history of threatening suicide, which is obviously a major red flag.
Definitely.
Robert Corbett, the same church leader who found Breanne, described Aaron as grappling with depression, noting that Aaron himself had indicated it ran in his family.
Hmm.
Furthermore, Breanne's sister observed that his mental illness appeared to be getting worse in the period leading up to her death. This paints a picture of an individual in significant psychological distress.
And importantly, this wasn't the first time authorities had been involved in domestic situations at their home. That's crucial.
That's a really crucial detail from the sources. The material indicates that prior to the homicide, the Gardner police had documented previous incidents at the Pennington residence.
What kind of incidents?
Well, these incidents were varied, but pointed to concerning patterns. They ranged from documentation of Aaron acting erratically to specific mentions of Breanne's concerns for his mental health.
So she was concerned, and police knew.
Yes, this establishes that there was a history of domestic disturbance and documented concerns about Aaron's behavior and mental state known to local authorities before the murder.
Okay, so you have the escalating mental health issues, a history of erratic behavior known to police, and the sources also mention significant financial difficulties.
They do. The material states that Breanne and Aaron were facing considerable financial difficulties. Bills were accumulating and not being paid, which, according to the sources, led to a lot of fighting between them.
That adds another layer of stress.
For sure. Financial strain is a common stressor in relationships, but in this already volatile context, it clearly contributed to the conflict and tension in their home.
And then there's the aspect of control dynamics, which is tragically often present in domestic violence cases. The sources mention Aaron's anxieties about some of Breanne's personal choices.
Yes, this is another layer the sources add to the picture of their relationship dynamics. The material indicates that Aaron expressed anxieties and worries about Breanne's personal decisions and interests.
Like what?
Specifically mentioned are her interest in tarot cards and tattoos, as well as his perception that she was distancing herself from their shared religious beliefs.
Interesting. How is that framed?
While these might seem like minor personal choices, the sources frame Aaron's reaction to them as potential signs of a desire for control over Breanne's autonomy and identity. In abusive relationships, attempts to control a partner's personal freedom, their beliefs, their connections, these are significant red flags for escalating danger.
Right. So if we bring all these factors together, Aaron's significant and worsening mental health issues, a history of suicidal ideation and erratic behavior documented by police, considerable financial strain leading to conflict, and potential control issues around Breanne's personal choices, it paints a picture of an extremely volatile and high-risk domestic environment.
It certainly does. As the sources imply, this wasn't a sudden, inexplicable tragedy. It appears to be the culmination of a complex set of escalating factors that created a dangerous situation within their home.
And this is where the story takes a turn that the sources emphasize as particularly significant and tragically dangerous. Breanne made a crucial decision in the days leading up to her death.
Yes, she made a courageous, life-altering decision. In the days immediately before her murder, Breanne decided she was going to leave Aaron.
Wow.
Her plan was to move with their 4 children to Texas, where she would live with family. This was a concrete plan she confided in both a friend and her aunt.
Taking that step required immense strength, especially with 4 young children.
Absolutely. And experts in domestic violence repeatedly highlight that the period when a victim decides to leave and attempts to separate is the most dangerous time for them.
That's a critical point the sources underscore. The period when a victim tries to end the relationship or physically separate themselves is statistically the most perilous time.
Why is that?
Well, because the abuser often perceives a complete loss of control over their partner, which can trigger an extreme violent response as they attempt to reassert dominance or prevent the departure at any cost.
Yeah.
Breanne making the decision to leave placed her in this recognized high-risk window.
And this is where her contact with the Gardner police just days before her death becomes such a poignant and, as the sources suggest, critical moment to examine.
It's heart-wrenching when you look at the timeline presented in the material. The sources state that just 2 days before she was murdered, approximately October 19th or 20th, 2023, which would have been a Friday, Breanne contacted the Gardner police.
Okay.
This was reportedly while Aaron was away on a trip to California.
And what was the purpose of that contact? What was she trying to do?
The sources are explicit. She reached out to inquire about obtaining a restraining order against her husband. A restraining order.
Yes, this is a key detail. It confirms that she perceived a threat and was actively taking steps, trying to seek formal legal protection through the system. She was reaching out for help during that incredibly high-risk period.
And Breanne's aunt, Brenda Hull's, reflection on this sequence, as quoted in the sources, is particularly devastating because it speaks to the perceived safety or lack thereof after that contact.
It really drives home the tragic irony. Her aunt, Brenda Hull, is quoted saying that Breanne thought she was safe enough to stay in the home and think about it after she had spoken with police that Friday.
Oh, no.
She stayed home on Saturday, October 21st, to decide what steps to take, perhaps weighing her options. But she was murdered the very next morning, Sunday, October 22nd.
Within 24 or 48 hours of contacting police to ask about protection, she was killed.
Yes, and this sequence, as the source material deeply analyzes, highlights what they see as a critical vulnerability in current domestic violence intervention protocols.
That's where the analysis in the sources becomes really important. It suggests that while law enforcement provided Breanne with information or options, when she called perhaps explaining the process for a restraining order, the unique, inherent, and immediate lethality risk in her specific situation was not, or maybe could not be, sufficiently mitigated by that interaction alone.
Meaning, just offering options without ensuring immediate, secure safety measures were in place wasn't enough to counter the documented danger she was facing, especially given her intent to leave, Aaron's history, and the prior incidents.
Exactly. The source analysis argues that the moment a victim reaches out for help, particularly when they are contemplating or actively planning separation from an abuser, and especially one with a history of instability, control issues, and prior documented incidents like Aaron, that moment should trigger the highest level of alert and demand the most proactive, protective measures possible.
Rather than leaving them in a potentially dangerous environment to think about it or decide on the next steps on their own timeline.
That's the core critique presented in the material regarding the system's response in this instance. Leaving someone in that situation, given the documented risks and their expressed desire to seek protection, is highlighted as a critical gap.
It feels like a huge gap.
The source emphasizes that this case tragically reinforces the lethal nature of domestic violence, echoing the urgent message advocated by Breanne's family. This is a matter of life and death, and the response needs to match that reality, especially when someone is trying to escape.
That analysis of the vulnerability of the system, precisely at the moment when a victim reaches out, is a powerful and challenging takeaway from the sources.
It compels us to consider if our current systems are truly equipped to elevate the response sufficiently and immediately for those identified as being in the absolute highest risk category.
Moving to the crime scene itself, you mentioned Lieutenant Parr characterized it as an execution. What evidence found, according to the sources, supports that chilling description of a planned act?
Right, that characterization of an execution suggested deliberation, and the sources reveal crucial evidence that confirms this was not a spontaneous act. Court documents that became public shortly after the murder included details about evidence found on Aaron Pennington's cell phone.
On his phone. And what was that evidence?
It was a note A chilling, detailed note that was reportedly found on his phone.
A note.
The timing of this note is critical. The sources state it was written the night before the murder, specifically on October 21st, 2023, while Breanne was reportedly thinking about her options after contacting police.
Wow. The night before. And the contents of this note, the sources quote them directly, don't they?
Yes, and they're incredibly specific and disturbing. The source quotes the explicit instructions verbatim. Don't say anything. Be quite. If she wakes up, just say you're getting nasal spray. Get on inside a bed, very close proximity to head. Put hole in her head.
My goodness, put hole in her head. That is cold, clinical, and horrifying.
It is. And as the source material makes clear, a note like this, with such detailed, premeditated instructions, leaves little to no doubt about the planned nature of the homicide. It is presented as stark proof of premeditation, confirming Lieutenant Parr's initial assessment of the scene.
And this proof of premeditation fits tragically into the context we've already discussed. Breanne actively planning to leave, Aaron's escalating psychological state, the financial pressure, the prior incidents.
Precisely. The sources explicitly connect the dots. This premeditation, laid out in that horrific note, aligns perfectly with the circumstances. Breanne was actively planning her departure, which we know is a period of heightened risk.
Right.
Aaron was reportedly experiencing escalating mental health issues, including suicidal ideation and exhibiting erratic behavior that had previously drawn police attention. The sources argue that this was clearly not a spontaneous act driven by a sudden argument or loss of temper, but a deliberate planned action conceived and executed within this volatile context of escalating risk factors, likely triggered by the imminent threat of her leaving.
The sources also analyze this premeditation as more than just planning a crime. They view it as a manifestation of a specific mindset, right?
Yes, it's interpreted as a stark manifestation of a dangerous, controlling mindset that sought to prevent her departure by any means.
By any means.
The source links this directly to documented patterns in domestic homicides, particularly those where the perpetrator's actions are driven by a perceived loss of control over their partner. Planning the murder, down to chilling details like what to say if she woke up, becomes the ultimate desperate act to stop her from leaving and reclaiming her autonomy.
So this case, with its tragic details and the evidence of planning, is presented as a powerful example of how multiple identifiable lethality factors in domestic violence can tragically converge.
It's described as a profound and tragic example of how multiple identifiable lethality factors in domestic violence can converge and escalate to a premeditated fatal outcome. The sources emphasize that tragedies like this are rarely isolated, spontaneous incidents. They are far too often the culmination of escalating patterns of abuse, control, and unaddressed psychological distress.
The detailed planning, even potentially in the context of severe mental health struggles, highlights that dangerous intersection of intent and instability.
Exactly. The sources argue that this element underscores the critical need for early, comprehensive intervention when such a combination of risk factors is identified. It's not just about addressing one issue, like mental health or finances, but recognizing how they can combine to create an extremely dangerous situation.
Let's turn our focus to Aaron Pennington himself. What picture do the sources paint of him beyond the events of that day?
Aaron Pennington is described in the material as a white male, standing 6'2" tall and weighing approximately 175 pounds. He has blonde hair and blue eyes. As we mentioned, he was 33 years old at the time of the murder.
And his background before this tragedy?
He is identified as a U.S. Air Force veteran. His role was a special mission aircraft maintenance journeyman.
Okay.
After his discharge in 2021, he and Breanne relocated to Gardner, where he secured a job with a defense contractor. This part of his background provides some context about his training and likely discipline, which perhaps becomes relevant when considering his ability to evade capture later.
That's an interesting point. Is there any information about his appearance or physical state around the time of the murder?
The most recent known photograph of Aaron that has been publicly circulated was reportedly taken on October 11th, 2023. This was just over a week before the murder occurred.
Okay, so fairly recent at the time.
Right. This detail is important for public identification efforts, but it also means that any changes to his appearance since then might complicate the search.
We've discussed his mental health and financial difficulties already, but it's worth reiterating their significance when we consider his profile and potential motives.
Absolutely. His documented struggles with severe depression, the history of threatening suicide, and the erratic behavior that led to prior police contact are not just background details. They are presented as central to understanding his state of mind. Combined with a couple's significant financial difficulties leading to intense conflict, these factors created a severe and escalating pressure cooker situation for him.
Based on the material, what appears to be the driving motive for the murder?
The sources are quite definitive on this. The primary and most evident motive for the murder appears to be Breanne's definitive decision and plan to leave Aaron.
So, the threat of abandonment, or rather, the reality of her leaving, was the immediate trigger.
That's the analysis presented. The sources suggest that this perceived abandonment, combined with his already fragile and escalating mental health issues, his depression, his history of suicidal ideation, the reports of him getting worse, likely created an extreme psychological crisis for him.
Makes sense.
Losing Breanne and the children would have meant losing his family unit, his control, and potentially, in his state, his reason for living.
And this connects back directly to the control dynamics we discussed earlier regarding his anxieties about her personal choices.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
His anxieties about her interests and perceived shift in beliefs illustrate a documented desire for control over her autonomy. When Breanne decided to leave, she was taking the ultimate step towards reclaiming her autonomy and severing his control. For someone with that mindset and already struggling mentally and financially, this challenge to his control could be catastrophic.
The sources offer a quite detailed analysis of this complex interplay of factors driving his actions.
They describe it as a complex interplay of psychological vulnerabilities, control dynamics, and situational stressors. Breanne's decision to leave was the direct challenge to his need for control.
Right.
This trigger occurred precisely when his mental health was reportedly worsening and the couple was under significant financial strain.
For individuals with strong controlling tendencies, the threat or reality of their partner leaving can be incredibly destabilizing.
That's the point the sources make. It can lead to desperate, often violent attempts to either force the partner to stay, punish them for leaving, or, in the most extreme cases, prevent them from having a life independent of the abuser.
Like this case, tragically.
Exactly. The premeditated nature of the murder, evidenced by that chilling note, is viewed as the ultimate desperate manifestation of this desire for control, preventing her departure by ending her life.
This case, sadly, offers a critical lens into the multifaceted nature of domestic violence, particularly its most lethal outcomes.
It really does. It highlights that these tragedies are complex, often stemming from a dangerous combination of psychological issues, controlling behavior patterns, and external life stressors that converge. It underscores the need for intervention approaches that are comprehensive, addressing not only the immediate safety of the victim, but also, where possible, recognizing and addressing the underlying issues in the perpetrator's behavior and mental state, while always maintaining accountability for their actions.
Following the horrific discovery of Breanne's body and the identification of Aaron as the suspect, a massive operation was immediately launched.
Yes, the sources detail a massive and immediate search operation that was initiated to locate and apprehend Breanne Pennington. This began right after the scene was discovered on October 22, 2023.
And what was the first key breakthrough in the search efforts?
A critical step occurred quickly. Police were able to locate Aaron's vehicle. It was a white BMW Model 320 bearing a Massachusetts veteran's plate, license number 830.
Okay.
It was found abandoned in a wooded area off Kilton Street in Gardner, near a place called Camp Collier. This discovery was made the very next night, on October 23, 2023.
And finding the vehicle immediately narrowed the focus of the search, I imagine.
Precisely. The discovery of the abandoned car in that specific location immediately focused search efforts on the dense woodland surrounding that area. This became the primary zone for the initial intensive manhunt.
What was the scale of the search operation and what kind of resources were brought in?
The sources describe it as an extensive multi-agency search centered on the area where the car was found, emphasizing its significant scale. Given the seriousness of the crime and the location, a wide array of specialized units and resources were deployed.
Can you give us a sense of the agencies involved based on the source material?
The list is quite comprehensive, illustrating the level of resources dedicated to this effort. It included the Gardner Police Department, Ashburnham Police, specialized units from the Massachusetts State Police, such as the Special Emergency Response Team, GERCH, the State Police Tactical Operations, SDOP Team, the Violent Fugitive Apprehension Section, VFAS.
So the heavy hitters.
Definitely. As well as the State Police Air Wing for aerial surveillance, State Police Canine units for tracking, the State Police Dive Team and Marine Unit for searching water bodies, and the Environmental Police, who are familiar with wooded and rural terrain.
That sounds like a huge deployment. What was the intensity of the initial ground search?
The sources describe heavily armed personnel meticulously scouring the woods. The search area itself was extensive, reportedly extending approximately 3 miles from the Pennington home, encompassing the area around where the car was found. It was an intensive, detailed grid search of difficult terrain.
Despite this massive effort, the initial large-scale ground search wasn't successful in locating him, was it?
No, it wasn't. The initial ground and air search operations were officially suspended in late October 2023, after more than a week of continuous searching.
Suspended, but not ended.
Correct. Authorities were quick to emphasize that while the large-scale physical search was paused, the investigation itself remained active. This wasn't a case being dropped, just a shift in immediate tactics.
Have there been additional search efforts since that initial push?
Yes, the sources note that the search has not been abandoned. Additional searches have been conducted in the area over the past year. The most recent documented effort mentioned in the materials took place on September 23, 2024, specifically back in that same wooded area where his car was found.
So they keep returning to that area.
It indicates a continued belief that he may still be in or connected to that location, or perhaps it's an area they need to re-clear periodically.
And what has been the public stance of authorities regarding their commitment to finding Aaron Pennington?
Authorities, including the Worcester County District Attorney's Office, have publicly stated their unwavering commitment to finding Aaron Pennington. They've assured the public and Breanne's family that they will continue to conduct additional ground and air searches until he is located.
So the message is, we're not giving up.
Exactly. They are not giving up the search.
So where does the case stand now, over a year later?
As of the latest available reports and the sources, Aaron Pennington has still not been apprehended and his whereabouts remain unknown. He has successfully evaded capture since fleeing the scene on October 22, 2023, which is now well over a year.
Over a year, and the warning that he is considered armed and dangerous is still active.
Absolutely. That is a critical piece of information for public safety. The Worcester County District Attorney's Office and the Massachusetts State Police continue to explicitly consider him armed and dangerous. This warning remains a significant factor in the ongoing search and public advisories.
While the primary working theory for investigators is that he is still on the run, the sources indicate authorities have acknowledged other possibilities given the circumstances, like the woods, the time passed.
They have. While the main assumption guiding their active investigation is that he is still alive and on the run, investigators have also acknowledged the possibility that he may have taken his own life or succumbed to the elements, such as hypothermia, within that extensive, dense wooded area where his car was found.
That's a grim possibility.
It is. The difficulty and scale of the terrain make it plausible, though unconfirmed, that he could be deceased there.
But Breanne's family, particularly her aunt, Brenda Hall, holds a strong counterbelief about that possibility.
They do. Breanne's aunt, Brenda Hall, has been very clear and vocal about her conviction that Aaron is not deceased. The sources quote her powerful statement directly. "I have zero belief that he is deceased. Zero. I am factually based, period. Until I have a corpse. I'm going to keep looking."
Wow, that's determination.
Her determination reflects the family's need for definitive answers and closure. They need proof.
And that brings us to the profound difficulty this prolonged uncertainty creates.
It's immense. The sources discuss how this prolonged uncertainty presents significant challenges for both law enforcement and the affected family. For the family, not knowing if he is alive or dead or where he is creates a state of perpetual grief and inability to fully move forward or find closure.
The terrain itself, where the search has been concentrated, poses inherent difficulties too.
It does. The dense wooded area where his car was discovered is described as inherently difficult terrain for search operations, even with the advanced resources like canines, air support, and specialized teams, the underbrush, hills, potential concealed spaces. It makes a complete definitive search incredibly challenging.
And despite all the significant efforts and resources poured into the search over the past year, he has evaded capture.
That's the reality. Despite the significant efforts by multiple agencies, including extensive ground searches, aerial surveillance, canine tracking, and dive teams, he has not been found in over a year.
What does that suggest?
The sources suggest that his ability to evade capture for this long implies either exceptional survival skills, if he remained in the woods, or that he's successfully escaped from the immediate area very soon after abandoning the car.
The sources introduce a concept to describe the state of the family and community in this situation: ambiguous loss.
Yes, they mention the concept of ambiguous loss. This is a type of loss where there is no definitive closure, no body, no resolution. It's when a person is physically absent but psychologically present, or vice versa.
Like here.
In this case, it's the physical absence with no certainty of death. This state of ambiguous loss prevents the full grieving process from occurring and perpetuates emotional limbo for Breanne's family, her children, and the broader community affected by the crime and the ongoing manhunt. They are stuck in a state of not knowing.
And for law enforcement, this means an indefinite commitment.
Exactly. For law enforcement, it means an indefinite commitment to an active investigation. This consumes ongoing resources, time, personnel, funding, and it requires maintaining public alert about a wanted, potentially dangerous fugitive whose location is unknown.
Legally, what is Aaron Pennington's formal status?
A murder warrant for his arrest was promptly issued following the discovery of Breanne's body and his identification as the suspect. He has been formally charged with the murder of his wife by the Worcester County District Attorney's Office.
So officially charged.
Yes. This solidifies his legal status as a wanted fugitive facing the most serious criminal charge.
And the warnings to the public couldn't be more clear or important.
They are consistent and emphatic from the authorities. Both Worcester County District Attorney Joseph Early Jr. and the Massachusetts State Police have repeatedly and strongly warned the public not to approach Aaron Pennington if he is cited.
Because he's considered armed and dangerous.
That is the critical safety advisory. He is considered armed and dangerous. District Attorney Early specifically issued a public warning quoted in the sources, urging citizens, please no one in the public go out and try to look for this guy.
Don't try to be a hero.
Exactly. This isn't just a standard warning. It's a direct plea for the public not to put themselves in harm's way by attempting to interact with him.
If someone in the public does have information about his whereabouts or thinks they might have seen him, what should they do, according to the sources?
The sources provide specific contact information for the public to report any information, no matter how insignificant it might seem. They are encouraged to contact the state police detectives assigned to the Worcester County District Attorney's Office at 50-832-9124.
Okay.
Additional numbers provided are the Gardner Police Department at 978-632-56000 or the Massachusetts State Police at 508-829-8326. These are the dedicated channels for submitting leads or tips.
And if there's a direct in-person sighting, what's the instruction?
The instruction is absolute and paramount for safety. Immediately call 911 and under no circumstances attempt to approach him. The risk is considered too high for civilians to engage. Call 911. Just to make sure listeners have the information for potential identification, can you repeat his physical description from the sources one more time?
Certainly. He is described as a white male with blonde hair and blue eyes, standing 6'2" tall and weighing approximately 175 pounds. The most recent known photograph for public reference is from October 11th, 2023.
Okay. This case, at its core, is a tragic, high-profile illustration of the dangers of domestic violence.
It is. The tragic and premeditated death of Breanne Pennington serves as a stark and painful illustration of the ultimate lethal consequence of escalating domestic violence. It makes the abstract statistics horrifyingly real.
And her family, profoundly affected by this, has become vocal advocates because of what happened.
They have. Driven by their devastating loss, Breanne's family has stepped forward to share her story and raise awareness. Her aunt, Brenda Hull, in particular, has been a powerful voice, stating emphatically, as quoted in the sources, "This is lethal. Domestic violence is lethal."
Such a powerful statement.
Her activism aims to cut through any tendency to minimize the danger and emphasize that these situations can and do turn fatal.
The community in Gardner has also responded to this tragedy.
Yes, the sources mention that in the months following Breanne's murder, the community came together. A vigil was held at Gardner City Hall in February 2024, not only to honor Breanne's memory, but specifically to raise crucial awareness about domestic violence within the community.
That's important.
It shows the profound impact her death had locally.
And the family hopes that by sharing Breanne's story, it can help prevent other tragedies.
That is their deeply held hope and motivation for speaking out. They hope Breanne's story can serve as a catalyst for change, helping to save other victims and prevent similar tragedies. The Gardner Domestic Violence Task Force has also worked to publicize the specifics of this case, recognizing its potential as a powerful teaching moment to educate the public and professionals about the dynamics of domestic violence and risk factors.
This brings us back to that crucial and often most dangerous period we discussed earlier when a victim decides to leave. Brienne's case, sadly, reinforces just how vulnerable that time is.
It does. Breanne making the courageous decision to leave and then actively reaching out for help from police just 2 days before her murder tragically underscores that well-documented, exceptionally dangerous phase.
Yeah.
As the sources repeatedly stress, research consistently shows that attempting to separate is often the most perilous time for a victim because the abuser's perceived loss of control can trigger maximum violence. Brianne's case serves as a devastating confirmation of that critical vulnerability.
And this leads to the significant point of analysis in the sources regarding the reevaluation of intervention protocols based on her interaction with police.
This is a major takeaway point highlighted in the material. The tragic outcome, following her proactive step to contact police and inquire about a restraining order, is presented as underscoring the imperative for a reevaluation of current protocols in domestic violence intervention.
Right. She did the right thing. She reached out.
Exactly. She sought assistance and initiated protective measures by inquiring about legal options. However, she was offered options and remained in the home to think about it over a critical weekend period. She was murdered within 24-48 hours of this contact.
That timing feels absolutely critical when looking at the potential for intervention.
It is. And Brenda Hall's powerful and challenging statement, if you're seeking help from law enforcement, you're not safe, directly questions whether the standard response in this instance was sufficient given the high-risk factors already present and potentially escalated by her intent to leave.
It's a really provocative statement.
It is. The sources suggest that existing standard protocols, while providing legal pathways like restraining orders, may not be designed to adequately convey or counter the immediate acute lethality danger faced by victims who are actively contemplating or initiating separation from a high-risk abuser.
So the system, as it exists, might not be equipped to immediately escalate the response for those highest risk scenarios. Is that the idea?
That is the concern raised in the material. It suggests the system might not be sufficiently equipped to immediately elevate the response for high-risk cases, potentially leaving victims in vulnerable positions precisely when they are at peak danger.
This case is thus presented as a vital learning opportunity.
It is framed as a critical learning point for law enforcement, social services, and victim advocacy organizations. The sources emphasize the urgent need for more robust, immediate risk assessment tools that can quickly and accurately flag the highest danger situations. And, crucially, the need for mandatory comprehensive safety planning that goes beyond simply providing options.
Meaning, not just telling victims what they can do, but actively ensuring their immediate safety.
Exactly. The sources suggest specific enhanced measures could include providing immediate emergency sheltering, ensuring expedited protective orders are accessible and rapidly processed in high-risk cases, or considering more intensive monitoring for high-risk individuals, meaning the perpetrators.
The fundamental point seems to be that the moment a victim reaches out for help, especially when planning separation, it should trigger an urgent, proactive safety response.
That's the critical takeaway from the analysis. The sources underscore that the moment a victim reaches out for help, particularly when expressing their intent to leave a situation involving escalating abuse or control, should trigger the highest level of alert and the most proactive safety measures, recognizing that this is the most perilous phase in the cycle of domestic violence. The response needs to prioritize immediate physical safety above all else.
Beyond the family, this tragedy has profoundly impacted the community of Gardner.
It absolutely has. Gardner is described as a small, quiet, central Massachusetts community, and Brianne's murder, the first homicide in 3 years, deeply affected its residents, leaving them deeply unsettled and devastated.
I can only imagine.
The presence of a Justice for Brianne sign that remains displayed outside her former home serves as a poignant and constant reminder of the tragedy, the ongoing search, and the community's shared desire for justice and resolution.
But the most profound and heartbreaking impact, as we touched on earlier, is undoubtedly on Brianne's children.
Without question. The sources highlight that the most profound and heartbreaking impact is on Brianne's 4 young children who were tragically present in the home when their mother was murdered.
Unimaginable.
They are now navigating life motherless, with their father a fugitive wanted for the crime. The sources mention they have been placed in the care of the Department of Children and Families, or DCF. Their trauma, losing both parents simultaneously in such a horrific way, is immense.
And Brianne's family has made deeply emotional public appeals directly to Aaron, specifically mentioning the children.
They have. Brianne's sister, Brooke Pirtle, and her aunt, Brenda Hall, have made heartbreaking public pleas, urging Aaron to surrender, emphasizing the impact on the kids.
Yeah.
Brenda Hull's plea, as quoted in the sources, is particularly moving and speaks directly to the children's loss. Your children are asking for you. You've taken their mother and you've taken their father. So the least you can do is let your children know where you are.
Oh, that's just devastating.
It underscores the vacuum left in the children's lives and their desperate need for some form of answer or stability regarding their father's status.
The case also received significant national exposure recently, which the family and authorities hope will help.
Yes, the sources note that the case gained national attention when it was featured on the television program America's Most Wanted on April 28, 2025.
Did that segment introduce any new details to the public?
According to the source material, the America's Most Wanted segment did provide new details for the public, including further insights into Aaron's struggles with depression, additional context on the couple's long-standing marital problems, and specifically highlighted Breanne's critical prior contact with the Gardner police just before her death.
So, getting that information out nationally.
Exactly. This national platform could reach a wider audience who might have information.
And that national publicity is seen as a crucial step.
It is viewed by law enforcement, community leaders, and Breanne's family as a crucial step for generating new leads that local efforts might not uncover. Ultimately, the hope is that this increased exposure will help lead to Breanne Pennington's apprehension, which is seen as vital for bringing much-needed justice and closure to this case for everyone affected.
So, pulling together this deep dive into the material you've provided, we've examined the tragic murder of Breanne Pennington in Gardner, a case characterized by apparent premeditation within the context of domestic violence. Her husband, Aaron Pennington, has been charged with her murder and remains at large, the subject of an extensive, though thus far unsuccessful, manhunt that has stretched over a year.
Right. The search continues, highlighting the inherent complexities and challenges of locating a fugitive, particularly when they may be in difficult, widespread terrain or have managed to leave the immediate area undetected. This case also serves as a stark and painful reminder of the potentially lethal nature of domestic violence, emphasizing the critical danger victims face, especially during the vulnerable period when they attempt to leave.
The warnings from authorities remain in place. Aaron Pennington is considered armed and dangerous, and the public is repeatedly cautioned not to approach him if sighted. Any information, no matter how minor it seems, should be reported immediately to the authorities through the provided contact numbers.
And as the sources make clear, for Breanne's 4 young children, for her devastated family, and for the entire Gardner community still reeling from this tragedy, Aaron Pennington's apprehension is not just about bringing a fugitive to justice. It is absolutely vital for beginning the long, difficult process of healing and finding some form of closure.
This case leaves us with a lot of heavy questions, doesn't it? When a case like this remains unresolved, with a murder suspect at large for over a year, what are the lasting psychological and societal impacts? Not just on the family experiencing ambiguous loss, particularly those 4 children who are now motherless with a fugitive father, but also on the broader community living with that uncertainty.
That's a huge question.
And how does Breanne's story, particularly her attempt to seek help just before her death, challenge our current understanding of what safety truly means for victims when they reach out, and highlight the potentially fatal gaps in our systems for protecting vulnerable individuals before tragedy strikes? It's a powerful, difficult story, and one that demands we keep asking these questions.
Indeed. It's a stark reminder that domestic violence intervention is not just a legal or social service issue, but a critical matter of immediate safety, and that continuous vigilance and systemic improvement are essential.